Aloha, I'm Dan Leaf. I go by Fig. I'm a retired Air Force fighter pilot and general officer. Today on Figments of Digital Imagination, Episode 4, I'm going to talk about why senior officers fly combat. And that's, of course, in the news because the second of two F-15E crew members rescued from Iran in a dramatic operation was an O6, as we call them, a colonel, a full colonel, and an operations group commander, which has begged the question in social media, well, why is a guy that senior flying combat? I've done that. I've flown combat as a one-star general in a single-seat F-16, and so, of course, I have a personal perspective. Today, I'm going to leverage the power of AI because I used Google's Notebook LM to generate an audio summary of the Facebook post that's gotten over 400 likes, so it's at least influential in the social media world. And I think that Notebook LM did an excellent job of digging much deeper than my post presented. So I'm going to leave it unedited. I'll add a few comments at the end. And thanks for watching. Please click like and follow Figments of Digital Imagination on YouTube so it gets a little more exposure. Over to my AI voices.
You know, you might have seen the footage or read the threads online recently.
Oh, yeah, the massive search and rescue ones.
Right, exactly. Where a massive military operation kicks off because an F-15E Strike Eagle goes down.
And the tension in those situations is just immense.
It really is. I mean, they scramble the teams, they secure the area, and miraculously they actually pull the crew out safely.
Which is incredible on its own.
But as the after-action reports start filtering into the public sphere, there's this one detail that emerges, and it causes a massive double take across like all the military forums and news sites.
I remember this.
Yeah, the backseater that they pulled from the wreckage, he wasn't some 20-something lieutenant fresh out of flight school trying to build hours.
Right.
That backseater was a full colonel, like an operations group commander.
What's fascinating here is that this isn't some rogue maverick story. It's actually a deeply calculated, ingrained philosophy about leadership. But you're right, it completely shatters the conventional image we have of modern warfare.
Yeah, I mean, we tend to assume that once someone reaches a certain rank, you know.
Right, once they have the eagles or the stars on their collar.
Exactly. We assume they're permanently stationed in some reinforced bunker somewhere, just staring at drone feeds.
Managing the conflict through a headset.
Yeah. And that assumption right there is exactly what makes this such a compelling deep dive for you today, because it sparks a really crucial question.
Which is, should senior military officers actually be strapping into combat aircraft?
Right, like flying into hostile territory, because in literally any other profession, you don't send the regional director down to the loading dock to operate a forklift during a crisis.
No, you definitely don't.
It just feels incredibly counterintuitive to put your top-level management directly in the line of fire.
Well, we operate under this modern business philosophy that management and execution are two completely distinct insulated spheres.
Right.
But the source material we're unpacking today really challenges that assumption down to its foundation.
It really does. We're looking at this firsthand, very detailed account from a former one-star general.
Yeah, he was the 31st Fighter Wing and Air Expeditionary Wing Commander.
Right, during Operation Allied Force. So that's the 1999 air war over Serbia or, you know, the Kosovo War.
And what's really striking about his account is just the complete absence of Hollywood bravado.
Oh, totally. You read his notes and he's not framing himself as some hero trying to relive his glory days.
Not at all.
He lays out this deeply philosophical argument for why shared risk is just an absolute necessity for military leadership.
It's non-negotiable for him.
Okay, let's unpack this, because the contrast in his first 2 nights of the war is just staggering.
It really is. You get extreme whiplash just looking at his responsibilities.
So on night 1, he stays on the ground. He actually makes a deliberate choice not to fly.
Which makes sense.
Yeah. Instead, he and his operations group commander, they take up positions on completely opposite ends of the flight line.
Oh, to oversee the launch.
Right. They are personally overseeing a massive 78 aircraft launch.
I mean, just trying to put that into perspective.
It's insane.
Orchestrating 78 heavily armed fighter jets trying to taxi, arm, and take off in the pitch dark.
That is a logistical nightmare.
You're dealing with jet blast, live munitions, thousands of gallons of volatile aviation fuel.
And adrenaline-fueled pilots on day one of a war.
Exactly. And a single blown tire, or I don't know, a miscommunication on the taxiway, doesn't just delay one flight.
No, it creates this cascading failure for the entire strike package.
So his focus that first night had to be purely managerial.
Yeah, he bluntly states his primary goal was just making sure the launch didn't turn into he calls it a cluster.
Right, playing the ultimate traffic cop.
But the moment he proves that the machinery works, he totally shifts gears.
This is where it gets crazy.
On night 2, this one-star general literally climbs into a single-seat F-15CG.
And he flies a defensive counter-air mission.
Right. And he doesn't just stop there. He goes on to log 18 more combat sorties over the course of the conflict.
18. Wow. And he wasn't just patrolling empty airspace either. He took on forward air controller missions.
Wait, explain what that means for the listener.
So that means he was the aircraft down in the weeds, visually identifying targets, coordinating the airspace, and directly telling other jets where to drop their ordnance.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. He also flew close air support and battlefield air interdiction. He was deeply embedded in the tactical mud with his junior officers.
See, I look at this from a strictly civilian perspective, and I have to throw a flag on the play here.
Okay, go for it.
Consider the corporate equivalent. Imagine you're managing this massive restaurant chain, right?
Okay.
It's Friday night, the kitchen is totally slammed, tickets are backing up, and suddenly the CEO walks in, ties on an apron, and decides he's going to work the fry station.
Right.
He probably thinks he's boosting morale.
Right.
But in reality, the line cooks are terrified of bumping into him.
Oh, yeah.
Because they have to cover for his, rusty knife skills. The boss is ultimately just in the way.
That's a classic trap.
Doesn't a general in a fighter jet just become a massive liability to the mission?
Well, that is the exact trap that destroys units. But the thing is, this general was hyper aware of it.
Okay, how so?
Because the flaw in the CEO analogy is the assumption of superiority. The CEO usually steps onto the line, assuming he knows how to cook better than the teenager on the fryer.
Right.
But this commander, he stepped into the briefing room, fully acknowledging he was the weakest tactical link in the room.
I mean, he actually provides the numbers to back that up in the sources.
Yeah, he admits he only had about 150 hours in the F-16.
Which the pilots call the Viper.
Right. And in the ecosystem of fighter aviation, 150 hours is nothing.
It's basically just starting out.
Exactly. Flying a fourth-generation fighter jet is not like driving a car. You are managing the radar, interpreting the electronic warfare screens.
Listening to, 3 different radio frequencies?
At least. And trying not to get shot down by surface-to-air missiles all at the same time.
That's intense.
At 150 hours, your brain is still actively working on just keeping the jet in the air.
Right.
You haven't developed that muscle memory required to be a lethal tactician yet. And he knew his limitations intimately.
So how does a commander maneuver around that then? Because if he knows he's tactically inexperienced, the 24-year-old lieutenants flying with him definitely know it.
Oh, they definitely know.
Right, so you have this one-star general who is a self-admitted liability in the sky. How do you keep him safe without torpedoing the mission?
You hand the control over to the squadron schedulers, and you strip away your own ego.
Meaning he let them tell him what to do.
Exactly. He instructed the squadrons to put him wherever he would not hinder the mission. He didn't demand to lead the glamorous, high-profile strike packages.
So no Hollywood stuff.
No. He let them slot him in where he could observe and participate safely.
Right, and sometimes that meant flying what he called milk runs, right? The routine lower threat patrols.
Yeah, exactly.
But the crucial detail here is his position in the formation. He started out flying strictly on the wing.
Yes.
He was the wingman, not the flight lead.
Think about the psychological inversion taking place in that briefing room.
It's wild to think about.
Right. As the wing commander, he literally dictates the lives and careers of thousands of airmen. Everyone salutes him.
Yeah.
But when the door closes for the pre-flight brief, he is answering to a junior captain or a lieutenant.
Wow.
Because the flight lead makes the tactical decisions. They navigate and they fight the formation. The wingman's primary job is just to support the lead, maintain formation, and survive.
Just put yourself in the boots of those junior pilots for a second, though. I mean, the stress must be suffocating.
Unbelievable pressure.
And the commander is remarkably candid about this burden in his account. He openly acknowledges the immense pressure he was putting on these young flight leads.
He states very plainly that it would have sucked for them to lose the one-star wingman.
Yeah, he literally entrusts his survival to them.
Yeah.
He actually specifically names the pilots who dragged him through those early sorties.
Digger, McJack, Fish, and Boomer.
Right. And he directly credits them with keeping him alive and basically preventing him from making fatal, inexperienced mistakes in a combat zone.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the reality of that danger leads to one of the most jarring exchanges in the entire source material.
Oh, when they asked him the question.
Yes. Someone finally works up the nerve to ask him the dark question. They ask, "Boss, what if you get shot down?"
It's a fair question.
And his response is just a masterclass in pragmatic institutional detachment.
What did he say exactly?
He replies, "That will suck. I hope you'll get me out."
This is pretty standard.
Then he delivers the kicker. He says, "If necessary, they'll find a new wing commander."
Man, that cuts right to the bone. They'll find a new wing commander.
It strips the ego entirely out of the equation.
It really does.
He is acknowledging that the Air Force, the mission, and the institution are infinitely larger than his own life.
Right. He didn't view his presence in the cockpit as some heroic endeavor.
No, he viewed himself as a replaceable component in a larger machine. He was just fulfilling a role that simply required his presence in the danger zone.
I mean, I respect the humility, and it is the definition of leading by example.
Absolutely.
But if we pull back, right, and look at this as an investment of resources,
Okay.
the math still feels really risky to me. You are putting a highly cleared senior officer with immense strategic knowledge into the threat ring,
Yes, you are.
and you are simultaneously strapping a psychological anvil to the chest of, Digger and McJack.
Right, because they have to protect the boss while fighting a war.
Exactly. So what is the actual tangible return on investment? Why was it worth the risk?
Well, the return on investment lies in a very specific type of strategic insight. Insight that you cannot synthesize from a command post. Because when a general sits at a desk and looks at a digital map populated with blinking colored icons, the war looks incredibly clean.
Clean and orderly.
Yes.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Because when that same general is strapped into a cockpit,
Pulling G's.
pulling G's and listening to the threat warning receiver literally scream in his headset because an enemy radar just locked onto him.
Suddenly, the data ceases to be theoretical.
Precisely. The first-hand exposure to the friction of the battle space fundamentally changed the quality of the information he was feeding back to headquarters.
He could actually tell the higher-ups what was working in the air and what was failing.
And his assessments carried the weight of empirical evidence because he was there.
But, the benefits didn't just flow upward to headquarters.
Right. They flowed downward into the debriefing rooms, too.
Exactly. He points out that his time in the air drastically changed how he disciplined his own pilots.
That makes a lot of sense.
When things went wrong, and the reality of combat is that things constantly go wrong, he was much slower to judge them.
Because he had experienced the sheer complexity in the air himself.
Consider the psychological mechanics of a debriefing, right? If a young pilot makes a tactical error and has to stand before a commander who hasn't flown a combat mission in 20 years.
The environment is going to be inherently defensive.
Totally. But if that same pilot knows the commander was flying in the same chaotic, saturated airspace the night before, the dynamic completely shifts.
Right. The commander understands the sensory overload firsthand.
Yes. It replaces a culture of fear with a culture of constructive, realistic evaluation.
Though there is a much heavier consequence to this shared experience that we need to touch on.
Yes, the credibility during a crisis.
The sources detail this deeply tragic event during the Kosovo War. It was on April 14th, 1999.
The convoy attacks.
Yeah. There were convoy attacks that resulted in unintended civilian casualties.
It is the darkest reality of armed conflict.
It really is. And the commander reflects on this incident with immense gravity. He notes in the sources that, quote, collateral damage is too gentle a name for the tragedy of war.
You read that phrase, and it really carries the weight of someone who fully grasps the finality of dropping weapons.
It does. And when a tragedy of that magnitude occurs, the military has to answer for it.
They have to explain the chaos of the environment to the chain of command, to the politicians.
And to the global press.
And this is exactly where the general's presence in the cockpit provided its most sobering dividend.
Unassailable credibility.
Exactly. He wasn't a bureaucrat reading a sanitized statement prepared by some public affairs officer.
Right.
He was a pilot who had flown in those exact skies, dealt with the same confusing targeting pods, and navigated the same chaotic communications.
So he could explain the tragedy with absolute gritty authenticity during the press conference.
We can frame this entire dynamic as tactical empathy.
Tactical empathy. I like that.
It is the deliberate practice of a leader stepping into the physical and psychological friction of their subordinates' environment.
Which bridges that massive moral gap, right, between the people who order the bombs to be dropped and the people who actually have to press the release button.
It fundamentally prevents the leadership from treating the frontline operators as abstract variables on a spreadsheet.
What's really fascinating, though, is that this concept of leaders sharing the danger isn't some modern invention.
No, it's not just for the 1999 F-16 era.
Right, it's a deep-rooted Air Force tradition. The commander actually points to a specific historical precedent to prove this.
Oh, from the book.
Yeah, he highlights this wildly stressful story from a book called Hot Shots, An Oral History of the Air Force Combat Pilots of the Korean War.
It's by retired Lieutenant Colonel Raymond D. McKelvey, Jr.
Right, who goes by the call sign Mac. So Mac paints this very tense picture for us. It's June or July of 1951, just before the truce talks.
The Korean War has basically ground into a brutal stalemate.
Exactly. And the 5th Air Force is tasking flights of F-51s to execute these low-level napalm raids against nasty targets right in downtown Pyongyang.
You really have to understand the sheer vulnerability of a low-level napalm run in an F-51.
Because these are propeller-driven aircraft, right?
Right. When you drop down to the deck to deliver napalm, you are flying directly into the teeth of small arms fire.
Oh, man.
Every single soldier on the ground with a rifle has a chance to shoot you down. It is an intensely personal, highly lethal environment.
Okay, so Mac is flying as the element lead in a 4-ship formation. He's the number 3 aircraft.
Okay.
The entire flight is being led by his squadron leader, Bill Green. Now, Mac has a wingman named Red Backman.
Bracking so far.
But the pilot flying in the number 2 slot, tucked right onto Bill Green's wing, is General Turner C. Rogers.
Wow. And General Rogers was the commander of the 18th Fighter Bomber Wing.
Right. He is the ultimate authority in that unit.
And he operates on the exact same frequency as our 1999 commander.
Exactly. General Rogers flew all the nasty missions, but he refused to lead.
He wanted his most experienced combat leaders up front, and he flew as a wingman to share the risk.
Which leads to this pre-flight huddle that just perfectly captures the terrifying reality of flying with the boss.
Oh, I remember this part.
Right. After the main briefing concludes, Bill Green pulls Mac aside. They step away from the rest of the pilots, completely out of earshot.
And Green delivers a mandate that basically breaks all the rules.
He literally looks at Mac and says, "You know who's flying my wing? It's General Rogers."
Yeah.
And then he tells Mac, quote, "I don't care if your napalms don't hit the ground. Your job is to take care of anything that might shoot General Rogers."
This raises an important question, though. Green is explicitly ordering his element lead to abandon the primary tactical objective of the mission.
Right. Delivering the weapon is completely secondary.
Acting as a flying Secret Service agent for the wing commander is now his primary directive.
Exactly. Green maps out exactly how Mac needs to alter his flying to do this. He tells him to lag back, slide out to the side, and keep his eyes glued to any threats.
Just scanning for anything that might imperil the general.
And then Green drops the hammer. He tells Mac, if anything happens to him, I don't even want to think about what's going to happen to you.
The cognitive dissonance Mac must have felt in that cockpit is just staggering.
It had to be so incredibly stressful.
You're flying a hyper-vulnerable, low-level strike into a hostile capital city, and your brain is consumed not by the enemy targets, but by the survival of the guy flying next to you.
But wrap your mind around the historical through line here.
It's identical.
It is. The technology evolves from a roaring, propeller-driven F-51 over Pyongyang to a supersonic F-16 over the Balkans. But the human dynamic doesn't change a single degree.
No, it doesn't.
You have Digger and McJack sweating through their flight suits in 1999 for the exact same reason Mac was sweating in 1951.
Young pilots fiercely protecting their commander.
While the commander willingly steps into the line of fire because they believe their leadership requires it.
Because they recognize that authority without shared vulnerability is completely hollow.
So what does this all mean? When you distill all of these accounts, from the low-level runs in Korea to the nighttime sorties over Serbia, all the way down to that full colonel recently pulled from the downed F-15E.
It all anchors back to one definitive statement from our source.
Exactly. He writes, quote, "If your unit is in combat, you as the commander need to be in combat, and you can't do that from the command post."
And the mechanics of that kind of leadership translate seamlessly into civilian life, too.
How so?
Well, you may never fly a fighter jet, but whether you're steering a company through a volatile market shift, directing a hospital ward during a crisis, or even just managing a complex household,
Right.
there is a very real danger in retreating to your own version of a command post.
Yeah, because the further you distance yourself from the ground level friction, the more abstract the work becomes.
Exactly. Your decisions lose touch with reality. And more importantly, your empathy atrophies.
You lose that tactical empathy we talked about.
When a crisis inevitably hits, and you need to demand extraordinary effort from your team,
Or when you have to analyze a failure.
your guidance will completely lack credibility if your team knows you haven't recently felt the heat of the fire yourself.
You just cannot lead effectively if you don't understand the friction your people are fighting through.
You really can't.
As we wrap up this deep dive into tactical empathy and the burden of command, we want to leave you with a question to ponder on your own today.
Look critically at the systems you operate within. If the person giving the orders never has to experience the chaos of executing them, how sound are those orders?
Take a hard look at your own life and environment. Where is your command post? How often do you retreat to it when things get difficult?
And what vital truths are you missing by staying inside it?
It's something to think about. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive today. We'll see you next time.
Well, that's it. That's their view of my view of senior officers flying in combat. And I think they put forth some very good, thoughtful considerations about if you're the boss, where are you? Where do you think you're leading? How do you think you're leading? Because if you're not leading in the trenches, you're not leading. So thanks for watching Figments of Digital Imagination. Again, please follow this podcast on YouTube and click like if you like. I'll see you next time.